The snow was falling sideways that morning, a white hush swallowing the land so completely it seemed even the sky had forgotten how to breathe. Out on the edge of Stillwater Creek, Eleanor Whitlow trudged through drifts that clung to her skirts and numbed her legs. Her shawl was thin, her boots cracked, and her wedding band hung from a string around her neck like a weight she could neither remove nor remember the comfort of. Behind her lay a trail of faint footprints, already disappearing beneath the wind's slow mercy. She had been walking since dawn, leaving behind the barn where she had begged for work and been turned away. "We don't need another widow's sorrow," the rancher's wife had told her, shutting the door as the cold crept up Eleanor's arms. She had smiled then, out of habit, not hope, and kept walking until the land emptied into silence. There was no road now, only whiteness and the faint hum of her own heartbeat. Each step felt like a promise she hadn't made to anyone. The storm thickened, turning day to dusk. She pressed her palm to her belly, where hunger ached like memory. Somewhere ahead, the world blurred into a shadow that moved, slow, heavy, deliberate. A horse. The rider appeared through the snow like a ghost called by her last prayer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, bare arms dark against the white world. His coat hung open, and in it, he cradled something wrapped in buckskin. His hair, black as wet soil, was tied loosely, strands caught in the wind. For a moment, fear rooted her to the earth. She had heard stories of Apache raids, men who rode silent, who spared no one. But this man's eyes were not fierce. They were desperate. When he saw her, he dismounted without a word. The horse snorted, steam rising from its muzzle. The man's boots sank deep in snow as he approached. Eleanor's breath caught. She could not run even if she wished to. Her body was spent, her mind hollowed by the cold. He stopped a few paces away and looked at her, as though searching for language in a world that had forgotten words. Then, slowly, he unwrapped the bundle in his arms. A baby, tiny, still, its skin pale blue beneath the wind's bite. She gasped before she could stop herself. The child gave a faint cry, a thread of sound, fragile and thin, and that sound cracked something inside her chest that had long been sealed. She knelt in the snow. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man watched her, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his English was broken but heavy with meaning. "Please," he said. "Help. My wife gone. Child cold." Eleanor looked up at him, snow gathering on her lashes. He lowered himself to one knee, the wind swirling around them like a prayer unfinished. He pressed his forehead briefly to the ground before her boots, then looked up again. "They come," he said. "Soldiers. They take baby. Say no mother." His breath came in puffs of white. "Need wife. For week. Just one." The world seemed to tilt. She stared at him, unable to speak. The storm howled between them, filling the silence where her reason should have lived. "You want me to," she began, but her voice failed. He nodded once. "Just act. 1 week. Keep baby safe." Her gaze fell to the small face beneath the leather wrapping. The baby's lips quivered. Eleanor reached out on instinct, her fingers brushing the child's cheek, soft, icy, alive. Something flickered behind her ribs, something that hurt more than the cold. The memory of her own stillborn child, buried last spring beneath an elm tree, now hidden under snow. She drew her hand back as if burned. "You don't know me," she said softly. "You don't know what I've lost." The man's eyes did not waver. "Loss," he said, his accent bending the word into something raw. "I know." He unwrapped a small piece of hide and held it out. Inside lay a carved ring, a circle of bone with markings etched deep. He placed it in her palm. "Name is Chaitin," he said. "Means falcon." Her lips parted, but no words came. Around them, the storm dimmed for a breath, as though listening. She could hear the child's faint whimper, see the man's hands trembling not from fear but exhaustion. The question pressed in her mind like a heartbeat. What does one owe a stranger in a world that no longer shows mercy? She lifted her eyes to his. "If I say yes," she whispered, "the town will see us. They'll talk. They'll call me worse than widow." He nodded slowly. "They already talk," he said. "Let them." A silence stretched between them, long and heavy. Snow settled on their hair, their shoulders, their joined shadows on the white ground. She felt the weight of his request, an impossible kindness, a dangerous mercy. And yet, when the baby coughed, she reached again, taking the small bundle into her arms. Its warmth seeped through her worn dress, melting the numbness from her skin. The man exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for days. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, faintly, he said, "Thank you, wife." The words stumbled from his lips, fragile as glass. Eleanor closed her eyes. The title struck her with unexpected ache. Wife. Once that word had meant safety, a home, laughter by firelight. Now it was an echo of a life she'd buried. Yet in that moment, beneath the storm's unending sigh, it sounded almost like faith. They rose together, the child between them. He led her toward the dark outline of trees where a faint glow hinted at shelter. The wind carried the scent of smoke and pine sap. With each step, her body weakened, but her resolve grew, as though purpose itself was what kept her from freezing. When they reached the cabin, a ruin half swallowed by snow, Chayton lifted the door from its broken hinges and motioned her inside. The air smelled of damp wood and ashes. He built a fire with practiced hands, his movements slow but sure. Eleanor sat by the hearth, rocking the baby, watching the flames catch. The warmth stung her skin. She studied Chayton's face in the firelight, the high cheekbones, the scar across his shoulder, the quiet in his eyes that came not from peace, but from years of carrying pain without complaint. He removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders without meeting her gaze. She wanted to thank him, but found herself mute again. Outside, the wind screamed against the boards, a reminder of the world waiting beyond these fragile walls. She looked down at the sleeping child, and then at the man who had trusted her with everything. "What they find us?" she asked. He paused, then looked toward the window, where snow pressed like a ghost against the glass. "Then we run," he said simply. Something in his tone, steady, unflinching, eased the fear that had sat inside her all winter. The firelight flickered across their faces, and for the first time in months, Eleanor felt the faint, unfamiliar stir of belonging. The baby stirred, and she bent close, whispering a lullaby she hadn't sung since before her husband's death. The melody wove through the crackle of fire, soft as breath. Chayton listened, head bowed, as if afraid the sound might break. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she could not name, something between reverence and sorrow. Outside, the storm began to quiet, and in that silence, Eleanor realized she had crossed an invisible line, not just from fear to courage, but from surviving to living for someone again. The wind sighed once more, lifting the loose strands of her hair. Then came his voice, low and certain. "Tomorrow, they will come." She turned sharply. "Who?" He met her eyes, the fire reflecting in them like twin embers. "The ones who want my child." The baby whimpered, and Eleanor's arms tightened around it. The storm outside began to rise again, a whisper turning into a roar, as if the land itself knew the fight had only just begun. The next morning came pale and cold, a thin light leaking over the hills like it was afraid to touch them. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than before. Smoke rose from the chimney of the cabin, twisting in the still air, the only sign of life for miles. Eleanor woke first. The fire had burned low, and Chayton slept on the floor near the hearth, his body turned toward the cradle made from a hollowed log. The baby stirred faintly, soft breaths fogging the cold morning air. For a long time, Eleanor simply watched the two of them, man and child, so strange in her world, yet already tangled in her fate. The smell of smoke and pine clung to the walls, and the quiet tick of melting snow from the roof made it feel like the house itself was holding its breath. She rose carefully, pulling her shawl close. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet. There was little food, only a strip of dried venison and a few hard biscuits. She warmed water and soaked one for herself, though her hands trembled as she held it. She had known hunger before, but never this kind, the kind that made her afraid to eat because she didn't know if tomorrow would bring more. Outside, the frost gleamed over the trees. Through the cracked window, she saw a raven perched on the fence post, watching the cabin with the stillness of judgment. For a moment, she envied the bird's freedom. Then Chayton stirred, his broad shoulders shifting as he rose. His dark hair hung loose, and a faint scar ran down his arm, pale against his skin. He nodded toward the baby. "She hungry," he said softly. His voice was rough from sleep. Eleanor knelt beside the cradle, her heart tightening at the sight. The child's skin was still fragile, the small hands trembling against the blanket. She mixed milk with warm water in a tin cup and fed her slowly, murmuring to keep her awake. Chayton watched, silent, his expression unreadable. After a while, he spoke again. "Town not far. Need food." Eleanor hesitated. "They won't welcome you." "I know." He began to pull on his boots, tying them with strips of hide. They whisper, but I go. I bring what we need." Her voice dropped. "If they see me with you." He looked up. "They already see." She swallowed. He was right. Even here, hidden at the edge of the forest, she could feel the weight of Stillwater's eyes, the way judgment could travel through wind and rumor faster than sound. "If we go," she said slowly, "I'll carry the child. They'll see a mother, not a stranger." For a moment he studied her, then nodded. "Good." They left together, wrapped in silence thicker than the snow. The path to town wound between frost-glazed pines, the river whispering faintly beneath its frozen skin. Eleanor carried the baby close, her heartbeat matching the child's faint rhythm. Every so often, Chayton glanced over his shoulder, scanning the tree line as if expecting ghosts. When they reached Stillwater, the wind shifted. Doors opened just enough for faces to peek through. The blacksmith paused his hammer. Mrs. Marrow stood outside her seamstress shop, her shawl drawn tight, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Lord in heaven," she murmured, "look at her." Eleanor felt the burn of every stare. She straightened her back, trying to appear calm, though shame crept up her throat like fire. Chayton walked beside her, head high, though his jaw was clenched. He was unarmed, his hands open. Still, no one moved near him. They stopped at the general store. Inside, warmth and the scent of flour greeted them. Mr. Jensen, the storekeeper, froze when he saw Chayton. "We don't serve." Eleanor interrupted quietly, "He's with me." The man blinked, torn between decency and gossip. "You best make it quick, Mrs. Whitlow." She gathered what little she could, flour, lard, a few strips of dried meat, and laid out the coin she had left. The sound of them hitting the counter was sharp in the quiet. She could feel Chayton's gaze behind her, steady, patient. As they left, Mrs. Marrow's voice floated across the street, like poison wrapped in silk. "Did you hear? She's taken up with one of them, calling herself his wife." Laughter followed, small, cruel, the kind that clings to walls. Eleanor kept walking. The baby whimpered, and she whispered a lullaby just loud enough for the child to hear, pretending not to notice the way Chayton's hand brushed her back, guiding her forward through the jeers. They reached the edge of town before either spoke. Chayton stopped and looked back once, his expression unreadable. "They hate easy," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "It's all they have left." When they returned to the cabin, the baby had fallen asleep. Eleanor placed her gently in the cradle and sat near the fire. Her hands were shaking. The whispers still echoed in her mind, each one a reminder of the life she'd lost and the one she was pretending to live. Chayton sat across from her, silent. The flames lit his face in soft gold. After a long while, he said, "You shame for helping me?" She met his eyes. "No," she said, "but I know what it costs." He nodded slowly. "I know too." The quiet stretched again, broken only by the crackle of burning pine. Then, softly, Eleanor asked, "Why me? You could have found another." He looked toward the cradle. "You were not afraid of death when I came. You saw a child first, not me." Something in his tone made her chest ache. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. The storm outside had eased, but a different kind of weather stirred inside her, something warm and dangerous. Days passed. The snow began to melt in patches, leaving dark scars of earth beneath the white. Eleanor mended torn clothes, cooked what little they had, and sang to the baby each night. Chayton repaired the cabin walls, brought wood from the forest, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, watched her with a strange tenderness that seemed to confuse him as much as her. One evening, she found him carving a small wooden figure by the fire, a bird with outstretched wings. "For her," he said simply, nodding toward the cradle. His fingers were rough, but the carving was delicate. She smiled before she could stop herself. That night, a knock came at the door. It was Sheriff Collins, snow crusting his hat. "Evening, Mrs. Whitlow," he said, eyes flicking to Chayton. "Town's uneasy. Folks are saying things. Thought I'd warn you." "What sort of things?" Eleanor asked quietly. "That you've married him. That you're harboring a savage. Preacher's coming tomorrow to ask questions." Chayton stood, shoulders squared. "We done nothing wrong." The sheriff's expression softened. "I believe that. But belief don't quiet fear. Keep your door locked tonight." He left, his boots crunching away through the snow. The silence he left behind was thick, uneasy. Eleanor turned to Chayton. "What will you do?" He stared into the fire. "We tell truth, but truth not enough for men who hate." The flames reflected in his eyes, flickering like doubt. She moved closer without thinking. "Then we'll lie," she said. "We'll say I'm your wife. Say the child is ours." He looked at her sharply, as if testing whether she meant it. "That lie make you their enemy too." "I already am," she whispered. The firelight trembled between them. Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering against the window panes. In that sound, there was something ancient, like the land itself holding its breath. Chayton leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke softly, almost to himself. "They took my people for lies once. Burned our homes. Made our names shame. Maybe this time, a lie saves instead." Eleanor reached for the baby, lifting her gently from the cradle. "Then it will be our lie," she said. "And our truth, too." He watched her in silence. In the glow of the fire, she looked almost luminous, fragile but unyielding. For a heartbeat, he imagined a life not built from desperation but from choice. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow and quiet. The world seemed to pause. Eleanor laid the baby in his arms, her fingers brushing his wrist. "Hold her," she murmured. "You need to look like you've done it all your life." He obeyed, awkward but careful, the child's breath feathering against his chest. Eleanor stood back, watching. A strange peace settled over her, the kind that came only when you stopped pretending you could undo what fate had already written. Then, faintly from the distance, came the toll of the church bell. 1, then 2, then 3, its echo rolling through the valley. Chayton looked toward the window. "Preacher," he said. Eleanor's voice trembled, though her face remained steady. "Tomorrow." The bell's last note lingered, dissolving into the hush of falling snow. The baby sighed in his arms, her small hand curling against his heart. And in that fragile silence, they both understood. 1 week had already begun, and there was no turning back. The preacher arrived before sunrise, his horse steaming in the cold as the first light brushed the hills in faint gold. His black coat hung heavy with frost, and his eyes carried the kind of conviction that mistook mercy for judgment. The town followed behind him, Mrs. Merrow among them, lips tight with self-righteousness, and a few men who came not out of faith but curiosity. Eleanor stood at the door of the cabin, her hands folded around the baby, the fire's smoke curling behind her like a shadow, trying to flee. Chayton stood beside her, unarmed, silent, his expression calm but watchful. The preacher dismounted and nodded stiffly. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, voice thin as the wind, "I've come because the town's troubled. Rumors travel fast in snow." Eleanor met his gaze, her face pale but steady. "Then let truth travel faster." He looked at Chayton, his mouth tightening. "The truth, they say, is that you've been living as man and wife with a—" He stopped himself, the unspoken word hanging like a noose between them. "With this man, and that child," he gestured toward the bundle in her arms, "does not belong to you." The baby stirred, as if aware of being summoned. Eleanor's arms tightened protectively. "You speak like you were there when she was born," she said quietly. "Were you?" The preacher's jaw clenched. "No, but I know your husband's been gone near 2 years. The people have a right to understand what manner of house this is." Chayton took a step forward, his voice low but steady. "This house is for life, not for your fear." The preacher turned sharply to him. "You speak bold for a man without a claim." Eleanor's voice cut through before he could go further. "He has one. I'm his wife." The air stilled. Even the horse outside pawed the ground uneasily. Mrs. Marrow gasped, her hand flying to her throat. The preacher's face hardened. "Do you swear that before God?" "I do," she said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. The preacher stepped closer, his boots crunching over frost. "Then you understand what you've done. You've made yourself one of them. You've defied the law, the order." "Your order," Chayton interrupted, the words heavy, quiet. "Not God's." The preacher turned on him. "Do not speak of the Lord to me, savage. You know nothing of his word." A deep silence fell. Chayton's hands clenched at his sides, the muscles in his jaw working, but he didn't answer. It was Eleanor who broke the quiet. "You mistake cruelty for righteousness," she said softly. "And you mistake this man's silence for guilt. But he has more honor in him than anyone I've met since my husband's death." Her words seemed to shock even herself. They hung in the air, trembling. The preacher's gaze softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. "If that's true, then let him prove it. Bring the child to town tomorrow. We'll see what's right in the eyes of the court." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "And if I refuse?" He looked at her like one might look at a condemned soul. "Then the sheriff will come for the child. And for you, if need be." He turned and walked to his horse. The others followed, murmuring. The sound of hooves faded slowly into the snow, leaving only the inside. Eleanor sank onto the stool by the fire. Her body trembled as though the cold had reached inside her bones. Chayton knelt in front of her, his large hands hovering near her knees, uncertain. "Why?" he asked softly. "You did not have to lie again." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Because they'll never let you keep her otherwise. And I couldn't watch them take her." He studied her face, something raw flickering in his gaze. Gratitude, disbelief, sorrow. "You risked much for someone not your blood." She gave a small, weary smile. "Maybe I'm trying to be what I never got the chance to be." They sat in silence for a long while. The fire snapped, sending embers up the chimney like small prayers. Outside, the world was still, the trees draped in white. Chayton finally rose and began pacing, his movements restless but controlled. "We can run," he said, "before they come again. I know paths they cannot follow." Eleanor shook her head. "You'll only teach them to chase. If we flee, the child grows up hunted. If we stay, maybe she grows up free." He stopped at the window, his profile etched against the pale morning light. "You believe they will change?" "No," she whispered, "but maybe I will." He turned then, and for the first time since they met, she saw him smile. Not wide, not easy, but quiet, real. "You are strong," he said. She let out a soft laugh that trembled into something close to a sob. "I'm just tired of being afraid." That night, the wind returned. It howled around the cabin, pressing against the walls like a living thing. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, holding the baby, watching Chayton as he mended the cradle. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man trying to build peace with his hands. "Chayton," she said quietly. He looked up. "When this week ends, when they stop watching, what will you do?" He hesitated. "If we live through it, I go north. Find what's left of my people." "And the child?" He looked into the fire. "She goes where she's safe." Something in her chest twisted. "And if that's here?" He didn't answer. The flames painted his face in bronze and gold, and she could see the war behind his stillness, the longing to trust what he couldn't believe was real. She stood and walked to him. Her hand brushed his shoulder, light as breath. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "Whatever happens, remember that." He turned, slowly, and met her gaze. The silence between them grew heavy, intimate. Then he reached for her hand and pressed it briefly to his chest. His heart was steady beneath her palm, strong and sure. Tomorrow, he said softly, I tell them truth. Eleanor's pulse quickened. They won't hear it. He nodded. Then they hear it from you. She wanted to tell him she wasn't brave enough, that her voice had never changed anything. But the way he looked at her with calm certainty made her wonder if maybe she could. The baby stirred, letting out a small cry. Eleanor took her, rocking gently. She'll need both of us, she murmured. He smiled faintly. Maybe she already has. The night deepened. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, silvering the snow. The fire burned low. Eleanor sat near it, holding the child close, while Chayton watched from the shadows, eyes bright with unspoken thoughts. She could feel the world shifting, something fragile but unstoppable moving beneath the quiet. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking away from something. She was standing her ground. As dawn began to pale the horizon, a sound cut through the stillness, distant hooves. Many of them. Chayton rose, the calm in him hardening into readiness. Eleanor's breath caught. They're coming, she whispered. He nodded once, eyes on the door. Then we faced them. The baby whimpered again, and Eleanor held her tighter, the warmth of her small body anchoring her to courage she hadn't known she possessed. The hooves grew louder, rhythmic, relentless, until they seemed to shake the walls themselves. The fire flickered, throwing long shadows across the cabin. And as the first knock thundered through the door, Eleanor looked at Chayton and saw no fear, only resolve, fierce and quiet as the storm outside. She drew a breath, steady and full, and whispered to the child against her chest, "No one will take you." Then the door creaked open to the dawn. The door swung open to a rush of cold and the glint of metal. Sheriff Collins stood there, hat low, snow crusted on his shoulders. Behind him, 5 soldiers waited astride their horses, breath steaming in the dim light. The preacher was among them, his face as pale as the morning. The smell of gunpowder clung to the air, though no shot had been fired. Eleanor stepped forward first, the baby cradled to her chest. "There's no need for guns," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "We hope not," the sheriff answered, his tone heavy with weariness rather than malice. "But the child's got to come with us. Orders from Fort Harmon. They say she's to be taken under federal custody. Mixed blood or no, it's not for you to keep. She's not yours to take," Eleanor said, her arms tightening. The preacher spoke then, his voice hard and sharp as ice. "You brought this on yourself, Mrs. Whitlow. You lied to God, to this town, to yourself. The Lord's law will not bend for sentiment." Before Chayton could move, Eleanor turned on him. "No," she whispered fiercely. "Don't. Not yet." He froze, the muscles in his arms taut, his breath visible in the cold. The child whimpered, sensing the tension, and Eleanor swayed slightly, humming a broken tune to quiet her. The soldiers dismounted and stepped closer, their boots sinking into the snow. The sound of the horses snorting was the only thing that kept the silence from swallowing them all. "I'm warning you," the sheriff said quietly. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Eleanor met his eyes. "You've known me since I came to this town," she said softly. "I've done no harm. I've cooked for your wife. I buried my husband with your help. And now you'll take the only warmth I've found." The sheriff looked away. "Orders are orders, Ellie." Something inside her snapped at the name. "Then you can watch," she said, her voice low, trembling not from fear but fury, "as I bury another." She handed the baby into Chayton's arms and stepped out into the snow. The cold bit through her boots, her dress clinging heavy to her legs. She faced the soldiers, her hair loose and wild, eyes alight with something fierce and terrible. "You think you know righteousness," she said, "but you've never stood in a storm like this and held a dying child. You've never watched a man beg the world for mercy and get silence instead." The preacher dismounted, his boots crunching toward her. "This is blasphemy." "This is truth," she answered, "and truth doesn't care for your comfort." The wind picked up then, swirling snow between them. The world seemed smaller, just her voice, his shadow, the thin cry of a baby from the doorway. "Take her inside," she heard Chayton whisper to the child. though his voice carried like a promise. "Don't look away, Eleanor." She turned and saw him standing in the threshold, his hair lifted by the wind, his eyes dark and still. He looked neither defeated nor proud, only resolute. "If they want her," he said to the preacher, "they take her over me." One of the soldiers raised his rifle, and the sheriff barked, "Hold your fire." The preacher's face blanched with fury. "You see," he hissed. "He admits it. He's no man of peace." Eleanor stepped in front of Chayton before the preacher could speak again. "You call him savage," she said, her voice ringing through the cold. "But he's the only man among you who knows what mercy looks like." The soldier shifted uneasily. The baby cried again, louder this time, and Chayton's hand brushed Eleanor's shoulder. "No more," he murmured. "You've done enough." She turned to him, eyes wet. "No, not until they see." He shook his head once, then walked past her, snow crunching beneath his bare feet. The soldiers stiffened, rifles rising. He stopped halfway between them and the preacher, the storm gusting hard enough to sting the air with ice. "You take her," he said evenly. "But you take me too. I won't live without my blood." The sheriff swallowed hard. "Chayton, don't do this." "I already have," he said. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of the river beneath its frozen shell. Then, from the back of the group, a boyish soldier spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Sir, the baby's quiet now." Everyone turned. Eleanor had come to the doorway again, the child pressed close against her chest. She wasn't weeping anymore. Her face was pale, calm, radiant in the light of the fire behind her. "You can't take her," she said softly. "Because she's mine." The preacher scoffed, but her words held a strange finality that silenced even him. "Yours?" he said. "By what right?" She looked at Chayton. He met her gaze, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them. Trust, grief, gratitude, something greater than both. When she turned back to the preacher, her voice was steady. "By the only right that matters. I fed her when she was dying. I kept her warm when the world turned its back. I chose her. Her breath fogged the air, and that's what a mother is." The preacher faltered. Behind him, the sheriff took off his hat. The soldiers shifted, uncertain now, their rifles lowering inch by inch. The wind moaned through the pines, as if waiting for someone to end the silence. Finally, the sheriff spoke. "We don't need to spill blood over this. The fort can wait." But the preacher stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. "You defy the law for a lie." Eleanor turned on him, her tone quiet but cutting. "You defy love for pride." Her words seemed to echo through the valley. The preacher stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. This widow who refused to bow, who turned shame into armor. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Then he spun toward his horse and climbed into the saddle, muttering a prayer that vanished in the wind. The soldiers hesitated, waiting for the sheriff's cue. He gave a single nod, and one by one, they turned and rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the hills. The snow began again, light, slow, endless. Chayton stood motionless until the last of them disappeared. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The air felt lighter, though the sky still hung low and gray. She looked at him, at the way the flakes caught in his hair, the exhaustion and disbelief mingling on his face. "You should have let me speak," he said softly. "You already did," she answered, "just not with words." He stepped closer, his hand brushing the child's blanket. "They'll come again," he said. "Not tomorrow, maybe not this month, but they'll come." She nodded. "Then we'll be ready." He frowned slightly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I told you I'd act as your wife for a week. Maybe I meant longer." Something like warmth flickered in his expression, though his voice was rough when he spoke. "You'd stay here? With me?" She looked toward the cabin, the smoke curling upward, the faint sound of the baby's sigh. "There's nowhere else I belong." He didn't answer, only reached out, his thumb brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The touch was reverent, uncertain. The storm quieted for that heartbeat, the snow falling straight and slow. Inside, the fire crackled. Eleanor stepped past him and placed the baby in the cradle. When she turned back, he was still standing in the doorway, watching her like a man seeing color after years of darkness. She crossed to him and pressed his hand, rough and calloused, between both of hers. "You saved her," she whispered, "but you also saved me." He looked down at their joined hands, then back into her eyes. Then maybe she saved us both. Outside, the sky was clearing, faint streaks of blue breaking through the gray. For the first time, sunlight touched the snow, scattering light across the valley. The world glittered as if reborn. Eleanor exhaled, the breath trembling from both relief and awe. "Look," she murmured, her voice like a prayer. "The storm's lifting." Chayton's gaze softened. "No," he said, "it's ending." The baby cooed in the cradle, and the sound carried through the open door, mingling with the wind. Eleanor looked at Chayton, and in that quiet moment, between fear and peace, between strangers and something more, their eyes said what neither dared to speak. Then, faint and distant, a single gunshot echoed from the ridge beyond the trees. Chayton's head snapped up. Eleanor froze. The sound lingered long after the echo died. And just like that, the world stopped glittering.